It was a gray afternoon in Dayton, Ohio. The air inside the attic smelled of cedar and rain, just like the day of my wife's funeral. My son Ethan climbed up the ladder ahead of me. "Careful, Dad," he said. "These boards could break any time." I tried to laugh, but my voice came out thin. Then they're not the only ones getting old. We were clearing out the attic together, sorting through boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. When Ethan moved a warped plank aside, something heavy fell from behind it. A brown leather suitcase hit the floor, the lock snapping open. Papers spilled out, yellowed brittle like they'd been waiting years to breathe again. And among them lay a small cassette recorder, cracked but still intact. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and pressed play. A woman's voice filled the attic, trembling through the static. "If you're hearing this, something went wrong. Protect your father." For a moment I forgot how to breathe. That voice, it was Margaret's. My wife's. She'd been gone for 10 years. Ethan stared at me, pale. He bent down to pick up the scattered pages. One of them caught his eye, a property deed with my name printed on it, my signature at the bottom, and another line I'd never seen before. Transfer of ownership to Daniel Hale, my oldest son. Before I could speak, footsteps creaked up the ladder. Daniel appeared, still wearing his work shirt, his eyes cold. "Dad," he said, looking straight at me, "you already signed the house away, 30 years ago. You just don't remember." I stood there, my hand still holding the recorder, my heart pounding. The smell of rain drifted through the broken window. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really didn't remember. Would you trust your memory or the paper that says you've already lost everything? The night after we found the suitcase, I couldn't sleep. The rain kept sliding across the old roof, whispering against the wood. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd really forgotten something that important. Our home sat at the edge of Dayton, the kind of quiet suburb where every house looked like it had a memory. The sign outside still read, "Hale Residence, 1973, though the paint had peeled and half the letters were fading. My wife loved that sign. She used to polish it every spring just to remind me the house still belonged to us. After she passed, the place felt heavier. Each creak in the hallway sounded like her voice calling my name. I kept her photos on the mantel, her cardigan on the hook by the door, and every letter she'd ever written in a shoebox in the closet. I told myself I was keeping her close, but maybe I was just afraid that if I cleaned too much, she'd vanish for good. My sons were different. Daniel, the oldest, was all logic. He dressed in pressed shirts, spoke in numbers, and always said the right thing. Ethan, the youngest, worked with his hands fixing air conditioners and old engines. Daniel talked about investments. Ethan talked about the weather. One thought with his head, the other with his heart. Daniel had been struggling for years. Some bad investments, a tax audit, things he never fully explained. He came around more often lately, always starting the same conversation. "Dad," he'd say, "this house is too much for you. You could sell it, downsize, live comfortably. Let me handle the paperwork." I'd nod, pretending to think about it, but the thought made my stomach twist. This was the house where Margaret and I raised our boys. The walls still held the pencil marks of their heights. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her apple pie. Ethan didn't want me to sell either. He'd stop by on weekends, mow the lawn, patch up the fence, check the water heater. "Mom said this house is our roots," he told me once, wiping sweat from his face. "You don't cut down a tree just because it's old." He smiled when he said it, but his eyes were worried. He'd seen Daniel's impatience, the way his brother always carried that nervous edge, like time or debt was chasing him. Then there was Lisa, Daniel's wife. A polite woman on the surface, always with a compliment and a casserole. But her words carried weight. She talked about smart moves and long-term plans. When she thought I couldn't hear, she told Daniel, "The property's our safety net. If we lose that, we lose everything." I started to notice little things missing around the house. Margaret's china cups, her pearl brooch, the brass clock from the dining room. Daniel always had a reason he'd sent them to be appraised or restored. I wanted to believe him. I really did. My memory wasn't what it used to be. Sometimes I'd forget where I put the mail. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and forget why. The doctors said it was mild cognitive decline. They said stress made it worse, and nothing was more stressful than realizing your own memories might be lying to you. After we found the cassette, Ethan wanted to dig deeper. He asked if I remembered Mom recording things. I did vaguely. Margaret loved documenting life. She'd record the boys' birthdays, her piano lessons, even the sound of rainstorms. "Voices don't fade if you trap them on tape," she used to say. But the message we heard wasn't one of her cheerful recordings. It sounded like a warning. I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Protect your father. Protect him from what? A few nights later, Daniel came by again. He brought a stack of folders, bank statements, tax forms, old letters. He set them on the table like evidence. "These are the papers you signed years ago," he said. "Proof that we transferred ownership to me when Mom was still alive. It's all legal." I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but heavier, as if someone pressed too hard with the pen. "I don't remember signing this," I said. Daniel sighed, patient but cold. "That's the problem, Dad. You don't remember a lot these days." Something in his tone made me shrink. Maybe he was right. Maybe my mind was slipping faster than I thought. But when I looked at that ink thick, shaky, I felt something off. Like the paper was telling a story I hadn't lived. Later that night, I went through the old boxes again. I found photo albums, letters, a few cassette tapes Margaret had recorded. Most were normal family birthdays, Ethan's laughter, her piano scales. But one tape had a strange crackling sound midway through, as if someone had taped over it. I rewound it, listened again. Between the static, I could almost hear voices. Lisa's tone, sharp and familiar. I couldn't make out the words, but it made my chest tighten. I told Ethan the next morning. He looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't think that suitcase just fell. I think Mom wanted us to find it. I wanted to believe that. Maybe Margaret had planned everything, hid the tapes, the papers, the truth, like she always used to plan her garden, knowing exactly where things would bloom years later." As I held that deed again, tracing the signature with my thumb, I noticed something small, but strange. The cross in the letter T of my name leaned left. Mine always leaned right. My hand began to shake. The suitcase wasn't just a box of memories, it was a message. And if my wife's voice had found its way back after 10 years, maybe she wasn't just speaking to the past. Maybe she was warning us about the present. What if your mother's last words came back not to haunt you, but to save your father? Sometimes I sat at the kitchen table after they left, just staring at the empty chair. I could still see where Margaret used to sit sewing or reading the morning paper. I would talk to her sometimes out loud just to fill the quiet. "Did I really sign that paper, Maggie?" I asked once. "Would you ever have let me?" The wind answered through the chimney, soft and hollow. On Sunday, Ethan dropped by with groceries. He always brought too much cans, breadfruit I couldn't finish. He asked about Daniel's visit, about the folders. I told him the truth. I didn't know what to believe. "Dad," he said, "you don't have to prove anything to him. You just have to remember who you are." I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But memory is a slippery thing. Some days I remembered the color of Margaret's eyes better than my own handwriting. A few days later, Daniel called. His voice was tight. "Lisa and I found a buyer," he said. "You'd still get your share, Dad. It's the smart move." I told him I needed time, but he kept talking about debts, taxes, opportunity. Every word felt like a nail tapping into the coffin of my past. When I hung up, I stood by the window for a long time. Outside, the oak tree swayed, the same one Margaret planted when Ethan was born. Its roots had cracked the walkway, but I never fixed it. She once said, "If the roots break the ground, it means they're alive." Now, Daniel wanted to cut it down before the sale. That night, I looked again at the suitcase sitting by the stairs. It wasn't just an accident we found it. I could feel it, like the house itself was trying to remember for me. Maybe the answers weren't in my head anymore. Maybe they were still hidden in what she left behind. I still remember the summer of 1993. The air was thick with heat, and the house smelled of lemon polish and hospital medicine. Margaret had started getting tired more easily than short walks left her breathless, but she still refused to rest. She said the house felt better when it was clean, as if the walls themselves could breathe when she did. Daniel had just married Lisa that spring. They came by every weekend, cheerful on the surface, polite as always. But one Saturday afternoon, Lisa arrived holding a folder of documents. She said it was about property maintenance, something to make things easier for everyone. She placed the papers in front of me and smiled too easily. "Arthur," she said, "this is just to adjust the taxes on the house. If we update the ownership form, it'll reduce your yearly cost. It's only temporary." I looked at the top of the page. Quitclaim deed. The space for sale price was blank, the date half-written. Something in my chest tightened. "This doesn't look right," I said. "Why would the county need my signature if it's just for taxes?" Lisa's smile didn't falter. "It's how they process it now. I already checked with a friend who works in real estate." Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, silent. He didn't meet my eyes. Before I could respond, Margaret came down the hallway holding onto the doorframe for balance. She looked pale, but steady. "What's going on?" Lisa turned sweet again. "Just some paperwork to make things smoother for everyone. With your health." "Margaret, we're trying to make sure the house is secure." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Secure for who? For a moment the air in the room went still. "I told Lisa I wouldn't sign anything until I talked to our lawyer." She pressed harder, said it needed to be done that day. Margaret stepped between us. "Arthur won't be signing anything today," she said firmly, "and he never will unless he understands every word." Lisa looked embarrassed, muttered something about just trying to help, and gathered the papers. But the look she gave Margaret before leaving wasn't embarrassment. It was anger. That night after they left, Margaret sat beside me on the couch. The lamplight made her face look softer, almost translucent. "They're scared, Art," she said quietly, "of money, of the future. Fear makes people selfish." I told her she worried too much, that Daniel was a good son, that Lisa was just confused. She didn't argue. She only reached for my hand. A few weeks later, her condition worsened. I spent most days by her bedside, listening to her breathe the rhythm slower each day. One evening, she called me closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "If anything happens to me," she said, "keep every truth in one place. Promise me you'll do that." I didn't understand then what she meant. I thought it was about letters or family photos. But after she passed, when I went through her drawers, I found a small pile of papers, copies of that same quitclaim deed, her handwriting scrawled in the margins. "Do not sign. It's a trap." Beside the papers sat a cassette recorder and a note written in her neat cursive. "If you ever doubt yourself, listen to this." I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, calm but firm. "I know you'll question your memory someday, but remember this, Arthur, you never sold our home. You never gave it away. The truth is safe if you keep it together." Tears blurred the edges of the tape label. I didn't know where to put it, so I gathered everything, the deeds, the recordings, her journals, and locked them inside the brown suitcase. I hid it in the attic behind the old beams, thinking I was just keeping her close. But now, decades later, I realized what she truly meant. She wasn't telling me to hold on to memories. She was telling me to hold on to proof. The suitcase wasn't a box of nostalgia. It was her way of protecting me from the day my own mind might betray me. In the weeks after her funeral, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every drawer I opened carried her scent, lavender and old paper. I told myself I was only cleaning, but in truth I was searching for her voice again. One rainy morning, I climbed to the attic and slid the suitcase behind the beams. I remember standing there staring at it for a long time, the metal latch catching the light. I whispered to her, "It's safe now, Maggie. I'll keep every truth in one place." Then I closed the hatch, went back downstairs, and tried to move on. Years passed. The sound of her voice faded, but the weight of that promise never did. Sometimes, when the wind moved through the chimney, I could almost hear her humming the same tune she used to play on the piano. I never thought the suitcase would be found again. But maybe she knew it would. Maybe she trusted that even when my memory failed, the house itself would remember for me. For days, the suitcase sat open in my living room, its contents spread across the table like fragments of someone else's life. I read every line on that forged deed until my eyes blurred. The more I stared, the more my signature looked like a stranger's. Ethan came over every evening after work. He'd pour us coffee and ask softly, "Do you remember signing it, Dad?" Sometimes I wanted to lie just to stop the pity in his voice, but I didn't remember. My mind was a locked door and someone else held the key. Daniel avoided the house for days. When he finally called, his voice was tight. "I showed the document to my attorney," he said. "It's valid. Maybe you just forgot, Dad. Dementia confuses things." That word hit like a hammer. "I don't have dementia," I said. "You were tested. Remember, worse isn't gone." He sighed. "I'm trying to protect the family." Then he hung up. The house was silent again, so silent it felt like it was listening. Margaret's photo on the mantel seemed to watch me, waiting for me to see what she already knew. The next day, Ethan drove to the Montgomery County Recorder's office. He wanted proof. I waited at home, pretending to read the paper, until I heard his truck pull in. He came in pale and breathless. "There's no record," he said. "No deed transfer. Nothing." and the clerk said the ink on that document didn't even exist until 2010. I froze. Then, what are you saying? I'm saying Daniel forged it. Dad. The word sat heavy in the room. He wouldn't, I whispered. He's my son. Ethan's eyes softened. And I'm yours too. But you didn't believe me until now. That night I opened Margaret's old diary, the one she'd kept locked for years. The cover smelled faintly of lilac and dust. Between notes about groceries and birthdays, one line stopped me cold. Lisa brought papers again today. Arthur refused. She called him stubborn. I think she's scared for herself. I made copies of everything just in case. A small cassette was taped beneath the entry. Ethan helped me set up the player. The tape hissed, then her voice filled the room, steady calm. If someone's hearing this, it means they found what I left. Arthur never signed the deed. Lisa said she'd fix it herself. Then another voice cut in. Lisa's, just sign it, old man. Nobody will ever know. The recording clicked off. Silence rushed in like wind through a broken window. Ethan whispered, "That's Mom's proof." The next morning, Daniel and Lisa came over. They looked composed, but too much so like actors who'd rehearsed guilt. Dad, Lisa began, "You're confusing things. Margaret was sick. She didn't remember clearly." I stood. "Don't you dare talk about her memory." Daniel raised a hand. "You're being manipulated. Ethan's turning you against us." "Enough," I said. "Listen to this." I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room again. When Lisa's own words echoed, "Just sign it, old man," her face drained of color. Daniel lunged for the recorder. "That doesn't prove anything he said." Ethan's voice was sharp. "How many old men did she ask to sign deeds?" Lisa trembled. "It was temporary. We were drowning in debt." Daniel turned on her. "Lisa, stop." But she didn't. "I told you this would come back." I sank into my chair. The sound of Margaret's voice still hung in the air. I looked at my son, the boy who once swore he'd make me proud. "You didn't just forge my name," I said quietly. "You rewrote our family." No one moved. Then Daniel muttered, "You think you know what it's like to lose everything. You don't." He left, slamming the door. Lisa followed, whispering, "I'm sorry." Ethan and I sat in silence. The recorder still hummed softly, the tape spinning though it was done. "We should take it to the county," he said. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. I looked at the suitcase again, not as a box of memories, but as evidence. That night, I lay awake hearing Margaret's voice. "Protect your father." I didn't know if she meant from them or from myself. By morning, Ethan had already gone to the records office. When he returned, he carried an envelope. They confirmed it, he said. "The tape's authentic. The ink's fake. We have forensic proof." I felt my knees weaken. Relief and grief twisted together. "Then it's over." He shook his head. "Not yet. Daniel's lawyer still has a copy. We'll need to prove intent." Intent. The word sounded like betrayal's echo. Later that day, I walked into Daniel's old room. The posters still clung to the walls, faded and curling. I sat on the bed where he once dreamed his future. Somewhere between that promise and today, fear had turned him into someone I didn't know. I pressed play again. Margaret's voice returned, calm and unwavering. "Arthur, if they ever use your memory against you, let the house speak. It remembers even when you don't." I looked around. The dent in the floor where Daniel dropped his toy truck, the scratch on the window frame where Ethan carved his initials. The house did remember. Every mark was a witness. That evening, Ethan called. "Dad, listen to this." He played a recording from Lisa's phone. Her voice shook. "He won't remember Daniel." "You said it yourself." Daniel's reply came cold. "It was supposed to be temporary. We'd fix it later." "You can't fix a lie," she said. The call ended in static. Lisa had given us the final proof without even knowing it. That night, Daniel came back alone. His eyes were sunken, voice frayed. "I heard Ethan took the tape to the county," he said. "Yes," he hesitated. "Do you really think I wanted to hurt you? I don't know what to think anymore." He rubbed his face. "When Mom died, everything fell apart. You stopped paying bills. The house almost defaulted. I thought if I put it in my name, I could save it. This isn't saving son. This is burying. I didn't do it out of greed. I did it out of fear. Fear doesn't excuse a lie, I said softly. He looked up, broken. You're still going to win this, Dad, but don't pretend that makes it right. He left without another word. His footsteps echoed down the porch. I stood listening until I couldn't hear them anymore. A storm rolled in that night. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder shuttered the windows. I sat by the window watching branches thrash against the glass. Lightning flashed across the attic window, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw the suitcase shift. Maybe it was just the storm, or maybe the house was breathing again. The next morning, Ethan arrived soaked but smiling. They're taking the case, he said. The county legal department. We'll have a hearing next week. I nodded. Grateful, but heavy. Grief doesn't end when truth returns. It just changes shape. Over breakfast, Ethan asked, "Do you think Daniel will show up?" "He will," I said. "Not because he wants to, because guilt doesn't let you rest." He smiled faintly. "You sound like Mom." We both laughed quietly. For the first time, the house didn't feel angry. It felt alive again, like it was waiting. That afternoon, I opened Margaret's diary once more. On the last page, I found a line I'd missed before. When the truth finally speaks, listen to it. It's the sound of love surviving fear. I closed the book and looked toward the attic stairs. The air felt lighter, as if the house exhaled after holding its breath too long. "Dad, are you ready?" Ethan called from the hall. "Yes," I said, standing slowly. "The house will speak for itself." I looked at Margaret's photo one last time. Her smile was small, knowing, almost proud. The fight wasn't over, but the truth was awake now. And once awakened, it doesn't sleep again. Ever been called crazy until the truth played back in your own home? That night after Ethan left, I stayed up alone. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear water dripping from the gutters like a slow clock, the kind of sound that makes you count your regrets. I sat by the fireplace, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Margaret used to sit in. I tried to imagine what she would say now. Maybe she'd scold me for still caring about Daniel, or maybe she'd remind me that forgiveness was never meant to be fair. Either way, I missed her voice more than I could admit. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey. The taste burned, but it steadied me. On the table lay the diary, the tape, and the letter Ethan had printed from the county office. Proof everywhere, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But proof never feels like peace. It only proves what's already broken. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to a soft knock on the door. The clock said 1:30 a.m. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, no coat, just a soaked shirt clinging to him like regret. "Dad," he said quietly. I couldn't sleep. I stepped aside. He entered like someone crossing a church threshold, slow, careful, guilty. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands trembled. "I saw Ethan's post," he said. "He told people the county verified everything. He shouldn't have," I replied, "but it doesn't matter now." He sat down at the table, staring at the suitcase. "I keep seeing Mom's handwriting in my head, that red ink. She always used red when she was angry." "She wasn't angry," I said softly. "She was afraid. For me, for you." Daniel rubbed his face. "When she died, I thought you'd forget everything. I thought if I could take control, I'd protect what was left. I told myself I was saving us." "You were saving yourself," I said. "And maybe that's what scares me most, because I would have done the same for you." He looked up, startled. "You would have. If I thought my son was drowning, I'd build him a bridge, even if it meant breaking my own back. But you built it out of lies, son. That's why it collapsed." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm sorry. I waited for anger to rise, but it didn't. Only a deep, tired ache." "Sorry doesn't erase ink," I said. "But maybe it can clean something else." We sat in silence. The clock ticked on the wall. Outside, a gust of wind pushed against the window like a sigh. Daniel's eyes glistened, and for the first time I didn't see defiance, only shame. "I'll testify," he said finally. "I'll tell them everything. You don't have to, I do. I need to make it right." He stood, walked to the door, then paused. "Mom used to say the house remembers," he murmured. "Maybe that's what it's doing now." He left without waiting for an answer. After he was gone, I sat back down. The whiskey was still on the table, untouched. I stared at the suitcase again, its edges catching the lamplight. For years I'd thought the attic was where the past went to sleep, but maybe it was just waiting for the right time to wake up. Ethan came by the next morning, cheerful but cautious. "Dad, "We're set for next week," he said. "They accepted all the forensic reports." Daniel's lawyer withdrew. "He told me last night," I said. "He's coming clean." Ethan smiled faintly. "You think he means it?" "I think he's tired of lying. That's as close to redemption as some people ever get." We went over the evidence again, the deed, the cassette, the diary entries. Ethan was careful, labeling each folder like a craftsman finishing a project. Watching him, I saw Margaret's patience again, the same way she used to fold receipts and label jars in the kitchen. She believed order could save the world. Maybe she was right. After Ethan left, I wandered the house. The floors creaked softly under my feet. Every corner seemed to hum with her memory, the curtains she sewed, the plants she couldn't keep alive but never threw away. These small, ordinary ghosts felt kinder than the living had been. In the hallway, I stopped by the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd built this house. His eyes were older, yes, but there was something else, a kind of quiet conviction. The look of someone who'd been doubted and survived it. That night, I found myself back in the attic. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted to thank the suitcase, or maybe I just needed to see where all of this began. The air was dry and cold. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight like tiny memories refusing to settle. I placed my hand on the suitcase. "You've done enough," I whispered. "Rest now." But just as I turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't before, an old family photo tucked under one of the floorboards. Margaret, me, Daniel, and Ethan standing by the porch with paint on our faces, laughing. On the back, in her handwriting, "The house is our witness." I smiled. Somehow she'd known even then. The next morning, I woke to sunlight flooding through the curtains. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel heavy. I brewed coffee, opened the window, and listened to the birds outside. The storm had passed. When Ethan arrived later that afternoon, he asked, "You ready for tomorrow?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's time the house spoke for itself." He grinned. "You sound like Mom." I laughed softly. She always did have the last word. That evening, I opened the diary one last time and wrote on the blank final page, "The truth doesn't save you, it steadies you." Then I closed it for good. Tomorrow, we'd face the world again, this time with proof and maybe with peace. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that settles after a storm. The kind that makes you aware of every breath, every tick of the clock, every ghost that memory leaves behind. I sat in my chair by the window, the same place I'd sat for years, but the air felt different now. Lighter maybe, or just emptier. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the smell of wet cedar still drifted through the cracks. I could hear the faint drip from the eaves, steady and patient, like the house was still healing from what it had seen. On the table beside me sat the suitcase, closed this time. Its leather edges were worn, the brass latch dulled by age. For the first time since we found it, it didn't look mysterious or threatening. It looked like what it truly was, a vessel of truth that had waited long enough to speak. Ethan had gone home for the night. He'd asked if I wanted him to stay, but I told him no. There were some silences a man had to sit through alone, and tonight I needed to sit with mine. I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, tracing the lines where the plaster cracked like the veins on my hands. I thought about Margaret, how she used to hum when she cleaned, how she always smelled like soap and lilacs. There was a song she loved, one she'd sing while folding laundry. "You are my sunshine." For years, I couldn't bear to hear it. Now, when it came on the radio, I didn't turn it off. I listened. Because even pain has a melody if you give it enough time. I remember the first day we bought this house. The walls were bare, the yard a patch of weeds, but she saw something I didn't. "It's not about what it is," she said. "It's about what it can hold." Back then, I thought she meant the furniture, the laughter, the noise of raising two boys. I didn't realize she meant truth. She built this home like a vault for it. Every drawer, every photo, every word she wrote. Now, sitting here decades later, I finally understood. Margaret hadn't just left me memories. She'd left me a map back to myself. She knew there would come a day when my mind might betray me, when fear or guilt or love would blur the edges of what was real, and she made sure the truth would outlast even me. I looked at the wedding photo on the mantel. She was laughing in that one head-tilted eyes, squinting in the sunlight. I used to think that picture hurt to look at, but tonight it didn't. Tonight it reminded me of something she said once the night before our 10th anniversary. "If the day ever comes when you forget me," she said, "don't be afraid. I'll find a way to remind you. Maybe that's all the suitcase was a reminder. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I still had. I reached for the diary again, flipping through the pages I hadn't yet read. Between the lines about chores and recipes were small notes almost invisible. Arthur fixed the sink today. Daniel got a new job. Ethan still leaves tools everywhere. Her life had been made of these small, ordinary moments, but that was the miracle of her. She found eternity in the ordinary. As I read, I realized how many of those moments I'd stopped noticing after she died. How much of her I'd buried just by forgetting to look. I'd spent so many years mourning the sound of her voice that I forgot the meaning of her silence. Maybe I wasn't losing my memory. Maybe I was just losing the sound of her voice. That thought stayed with me, heavier than any sadness, but gentler too. It felt like forgiveness, not from Daniel or Ethan, but from her. From the woman who had trusted me to find my way back. The light outside dimmed into that deep Ohio twilight where the sky turns the color of smoke. The oak tree swayed in the wind, brushing the window with a rhythm that almost sounded like breathing. I could imagine her sitting here beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine, no words needed. I spoke anyway. You did it, Maggie. You kept your promise. You made sure the truth didn't die with you. I half expected silence. But in that stillness, I could almost hear her laugh, soft and distant, carried by the house itself. Ethan came back just before midnight. He didn't say much, just sat down across from me, both of us watching the rain start again. We didn't need to talk about Daniel or the hearing or what would come next. We'd already said everything that mattered. After a long while, Ethan said, "Do you think Mom knew this would happen?" I smiled faintly. She didn't hope for it, but she prepared for it. That's who she was. He nodded. Eyes glassy but calm. I miss her. So do I said. But missing her isn't the same as losing her. Not anymore. We sat there in silence again, the kind that doesn't hurt, the kind that feels like rest. Eventually he stood. "I'll lock up," he said. I nodded, but before he left I stopped him. "Ethan," I said quietly, "thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He smiled. "I wasn't believing in you, Dad. I was believing in us." After he went upstairs, I turned back to the suitcase one last time. The latch clicked softly as I opened it. Inside, the papers were neatly stacked, the tapes rewound, the diary closed. I added something new to the top, a folded note I'd written on plain paper. It said, "Thank you for keeping me honest." Then I closed the lid and locked it. I don't know if I'll ever open it again. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe some truths once spoken don't have to shout anymore. If your parent left you a message from the grave, would you listen? The morning of the hearing came quietly. The air was cool, washed clean by last night's rain. I woke before dawn and sat on the edge of my bed, letting the early light spill across the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of forgetting. Every piece of truth I needed was right where it belonged, waiting in that old brown suitcase. Ethan offered to drive, but I told him I'd meet him there. Some roads a man has to walk on his own at least once. I made coffee, packed the diary, the deed, the tapes, and the letter Daniel had written. I placed them neatly inside the suitcase, then closed the latch with a steady hand. The sound was soft, final, like a chapter closing. The courthouse was smaller than I remembered, brick walls, pale carpet, the smell of old paper. People moved quietly like ghosts with clipboards. Ethan met me at the door, his expression calm but alert. He'd always been good at keeping me steady, even when I didn't deserve it. Daniel was already there. He stood near the window, shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he turned, our eyes met, and for a heartbeat neither of us moved. Then he gave a small nod, half apology, half surrender. We didn't speak as we sat down. The clerk called our names, papers, shuffled pens, scratched. I placed the suitcase on the table and opened it slowly. The tape recorder, the diary, the forged deed, all of it laid bare like the bones of a confession. The county officer examined each item, noting the forensic report Ethan had submitted. Daniel kept his eyes on the floor. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. When the officer asked him to confirm whether he had authored the document, hesitated. I could hear the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally he said, "Yes, I did. I forged it." The words came out broken but clear. The officer wrote it down. The pen scratched against the paper like rain on glass. Ethan exhaled, but I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet ache. I looked at Daniel. He looked so small then, like the boy who used to follow me into the garage asking how engines worked, asking how to make things last. The officer gathered the papers. "We'll void the transfer and restore title," he said. "You'll receive written confirmation within the week." Ethan thanked him, but I could barely hear. My focus was on my son. His hands shook as he stood to leave. I called out before he reached the door. "Daniel." He stopped, shoulders stiff. Slowly, he turned back. I walked toward him, each step feeling heavier than the last. "You didn't steal my house, son," I said. "You almost erased your mother's last words." He closed his eyes, and the tears finally came. No loud sobs, no drama, just quiet surrender. He nodded, then whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. There was nothing else to say. The truth had already done the talking. When it was over, Ethan and I walked outside. The sky was clearing again, the sun pushing through the gray. The world looked ordinary: cars, people, noise, but everything in me felt rearranged. It wasn't victory. It was balance. We drove home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, the house stood waiting, the afternoon light spilling across its porch. The sign at the gate still hung crooked letters, faded but readable. Hale Residence, 1973. I told Ethan I needed a few minutes alone. He nodded and went to the backyard. I found the old paintbrush in the shed along with a small can of varnish that had probably been sitting there for years. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but I took my time. I cleaned the board, brushed off the dust, and began tracing each letter, slow, deliberate strokes. As I worked, the smell of varnish filled the air, sharp and familiar. The same smell from decades ago when Margaret and I first hung the sign. I remembered her laughter as the wind blew sawdust into her hair. "It's crooked," she'd said. And I told her, "So are we, but we still stand." Now, as the brush glided over the final E, I could almost hear her again. That soft laugh, that warmth that still lived somewhere in these walls. Ethan came around the corner watching me work. "Need help?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not this time." He smiled and leaned against the porch rail. "You know Mom would love this." "I know," I said. "She always liked things finished properly." When I was done, I stepped back. The letters gleamed in the sunlight, clean, whole, proud. For a moment it felt like the house itself exhaled. Ethan put a hand on my shoulder. "Dad," he said quietly, "will you ever forgive him?" I watched the sunlight glint off the wet paint gold against the wood. "I already did," I said. The day the truth spoke for itself. We stood there together, just breathing, listening to the wind move through the trees. It didn't sound like morning anymore. It sounded like peace returning. As we went inside, I turned back for one last look. The sign caught the last rays of light glowing faintly. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud to call it mine again. Not because it was property, but because it was home. Some things you don't fight to win. You fight to remember who you are. The sun was low when we finished. The paint on the sign gleamed like new gold, and the house stood quiet behind us, wrapped in the calm that always follows a long storm. Ethan packed up the brushes, washed his hands at the outdoor sink, and smiled. "It looks right again," he said. "It always was," I answered. "We just had to see it clearly." Inside, the house smelled of varnish and warm wood, the kind of smell that makes you think time might actually be kind. Ethan looked around the living room one last time before heading upstairs with the suitcase. "I'll put it back in the attic, same spot as before," he said. I nodded, sitting down in my chair by the window. The evening light stretched long across the floor, touching the edges of every old photo. I could hear his footsteps above me, soft, careful, as if he didn't want to wake the past. Then came the sound. A faint metallic click. Not loud, but distinct. The kind of sound that makes you pause. "Ethan," I called. "I just closed the latch," he answered. It locked itself, actually. A few seconds later, he came down holding a small red slip of paper in his hand. "This fell out," he said. It was stuck behind the lining. He handed it to me. The paper was thin, brittle, folded twice. I opened it carefully. The ink was faded but still red, written in my wife's delicate hand. "If you find this suitcase, believe your father. He never sold the house." I felt the air leave my lungs. The letters were hers, sharp, graceful, alive. I could almost see her sitting at the desk writing those words, trusting they'd find their way home. I read the line again and again until the words blurred. Then I smiled, tears slipping down without shame. "You finally spoke, Maggie," I whispered. "You finally spoke." Ethan placed the suitcase back in the attic. The latch clicked once more, sealing the past inside. For a moment, everything was still. And then faintly, maybe from the attic, maybe from memory, I heard her voice again. "Protect your father, protect your father, protect your father." The echoes faded into the evening light, leaving only the soft hum of peace. Voices fade, but guilt echoes louder. Would you forgive your family if the truth came from the grave? Tell me what you would have done. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every family hides a story, and here, every voice still echoes. Thank you for watching.